Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into some, well, pretty heavy stuff. We're talking about race riots in America.
Yeah, heavy but important, right.
Absolutely. And specifically, we're going to be looking at three events: the Tulsa Race Massacre, the Detroit Race Riot, and the Watts Riots.
And these weren't just isolated incidents. These events left scars on the nation, wounds that don't seem to heal.
So they keep getting ripped open again and again.
Right, exactly. And that's what we're going to try to unpack today, right? Why were these events so pivotal? Why do they still resonate today?
And why do they seem to be, sadly, so tragically relevant? So let's start with the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. It's interesting. So many people have never even heard of this event.
It's almost like it was intentionally buried for decades.
It's true. It's like it was deliberately erased from the history books.
And that erasure is a big part of why it's so important to talk about. Tulsa, 1921, you had this thriving black community in Oklahoma. They called it Black Wall Street.
I've seen pictures. It's incredible. They built businesses, schools, a hospital.
A testament to black excellence, especially in the face of Jim Crow.
It's heartbreaking when you see, like, how hard-won this prosperity was. And
When
then
then in just 48 hours, it's gone. Wiped off the map,
48 hours.
just like that. The spark was an accusation against Dick Rowland, this young black man accused of assaulting a white woman.
But from what I understand, the accusation was,
Flimsy,
yeah,
more than likely completely fabricated.
a tragically familiar story, especially for that era, right? One incident fueled by prejudice and racism explodes into this widespread.
Oh, it was horrific. The Tulsa Race Massacre, historians estimate, resulted in anywhere from 100 to 300 deaths, possibly more. Over 1,200 homes destroyed.
You think about the human toll, the families torn apart, the years of progress just erased.
And to this day, we still don't have an exact death count. I mean, does that tell you something?
It underscores the lack of justice, the lack of any real investigation.
It was a massacre, plain and simple, covered up and buried for decades.
And that cover-up, that silence surrounding Tulsa, it allowed the very racism that fueled the massacre to continue, unchecked. No healing, no reconciliation.
It's only been recently, the last few decades, that people have started uncovering the truth about Tulsa, fighting back against that historical amnesia.
It's so important, right,
Yeah.
to learn from these horrific events.
Absolutely. The Tulsa Race Massacre wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom of, unfortunately, a chronic illness, plaguing America.
And sadly, that pattern of racial tension, of economic disparities,
Yeah.
and ultimately violence.
Okay.
Well, it rears its ugly head again just a few decades later in 1943. Detroit.
Yeah, and it's almost like those unhealed wounds you were talking about, those festering resentments, they were bound to resurface.
And resurface they did. Detroit in 1943, oh, it was a tinderbox. You had the Great Migration in full swing, black Americans moving north, looking for opportunity, trying to escape the Jim Crow South.
But often met with hostility, right? Discrimination. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It wasn't a warm welcome. And then you throw in World War II, everyone's on edge.
Right, you got all that wartime anxiety, the rationing, the uncertainty.
And then the competition for jobs and housing, it's just a recipe for conflict.
And sure enough, just like in Tulsa, a seemingly small incident, sets it all off. This time it was a fight, right, between some white and black youths on Belle Isle.
Belle Isle Park, yeah, popular spot in Detroit.
And from what I understand, the authorities, well, let's just say they didn't exactly help the situation.
It's a pattern we see again and again, right? Instead of protecting everyone, the police often sided with,
The white mobs.
yeah, either through direct action or just by looking the other way.
Which almost makes it worse, right? Like, you're supposed to protect us, not...
Betrayal of trust. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the consequences. Devastating. 34 people dead, hundreds injured, millions of dollars in property damage.
It's the damage you don't see, right? The
Uh-huh.
lasting trauma.
The rupture in the social fabric. Yeah, the racial divide just gets wider.
And it makes you wonder, right? Were these riots, were they really about these specific incidents, or were they about something bigger, something deeper?
I think that's a crucial question. These events, they were symptoms of a systemic illness, unaddressed grievances, a power structure that's resistant to change.
And that brings us to, our next stop on this deep dive.
Yeah.
The Watts Riots of 1965. Another searing reminder that those wounds from Tulsa, from Detroit, they hadn't healed. Not even close. So here we are, 1965, Watts, Los Angeles. I mean, you'd think, right, with the civil rights movement, gaining all this momentum, things would be different.
You'd hope so, right?
But then Watts erupts, and it's like, It's like we're right back where we started. History repeating itself.
And that's the thing, isn't it? The Watts riots, they weren't just a product of the past. They were a sign. A sign that progress, while it isn't a straight line, it's fragile.
And it can be so easily derailed, especially when the underlying issues, they just don't go away. So you have this context of simmering frustration in Watts, right? You've got the poverty, the police brutality, the lack of opportunity, and then, right, Marquette Fry, this black motorist pulled over for a traffic violation. And that becomes the tipping point, right?
And it wasn't just about the traffic stop, was it? It was about what it represented, the daily indignities, the feeling of being, targeted, like the system was rigged against you.
And it's not just in that moment, right?
Yeah.
It's decades of this. Decades of frustration, of broken promises, all those unhealed wounds from Tulsa, from Detroit, from countless other injustices, big and small, they all just come pouring out.
Exactly. It's like a dam breaking.
And the Watts riots, they lasted for 6 days. 6 days of unrest, 34 dead, over 1,000 injured. I mean, it was a wake-up call for the nation. Passing civil rights laws, it wasn't enough.
No, it showed that real equality, it requires more than just changing the laws on paper. It requires changing hearts and minds, changing the system itself.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. 3 different eras, 3 different cities, but the same themes, they just keep coming up again and again. Systemic racism, the economic disparities, that broken relationship between law enforcement and the communities they're supposed to protect. It's a lot, and it can feel overwhelming. But it's so important that we don't turn away from this history, especially today.
I agree. We can't afford to ignore these echoes of the past because those echoes, they're still reverberating in the present. If we truly want to understand the racial dynamics of today, we have to look back, examine those historical wounds, ask ourselves, how did we get here? How have these wounds shaped our current reality?
So where do we go from here? What can we possibly learn from these tragedies?
That's the question, isn't it? For me, it comes down to this. Acknowledging the past, yeah, that's important. But it's not enough. We have to use this knowledge, this painful history, to inform our actions in the present. We have to be willing to have the uncomfortable conversations to challenge our own biases, and to really dismantle the systems that are perpetuating these inequalities.
It seems so daunting, but it also feels necessary. Because if these events, if they teach us anything, it's that silence in action. They only allow the cycle to repeat itself.
And we all have a role to play in breaking that cycle, whether it's through education or advocacy or just, having those difficult conversations with our friends and family. We can all contribute to creating a better, more just future.
This deep dive, it's been a tough one, but an important one. It's a reminder of the human cost of hate and indifference, but it's also a testament to the resilience of these communities, fighting for their dignity, for their rights.
And as we confront these uncomfortable truths, let's remember that this isn't about assigning blame. It's about understanding the roots of inequality and using that understanding to inspire action to build a better future.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of these pivotal events. Remember, learning from the past, that's the first step toward creating a more just and equitable future. Until next time, this has been The Deep Dive.